Welcome, everybody, to my last chair of the Informational Committee of your City Council in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Today's the 16th of May, 2017. Thank you all for being here and for those that are watching at home. Let's start with a report from the UDC Organized Development Commission with Councilor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I always enjoy my service on the UDC. There's nothing better than hanging out with urban planners and engineers and seeing who has the longest list of acronyms and things we can go through by the time we're done. So every once in a while I pretend to know what they're talking about. But the Urbanized Development Commission is, like I said, probably one of the best groups that I have served on in the last year, getting to know some of the projects that are going on in our metropolitan planning area, looking at how 229 going around the city and how those intersections are going to be updated and fixed and the options of the public input that goes with that. So a large part of this last meeting, last Tuesday on May 11th, was spent talking about those intersections. But primarily the first thing that we did was to elect a new chairperson. With the passing of Mr. Metley, there was an opening for the chair, and former county commissioner and Sioux Fallsite Carol Tweet agreed to serve as the chair of the group. So her background and in the community, both the county and the city, she's going to be a great chair to lead that group and did a great job at that meeting. There were a couple of what are called TIP improvements, Transportation Improvement Program. There was some money that was added back into a couple of projects, one on Veterans Parkway and Interstate 90, and the other was also for Veterans Parkway from Interstate 90 to Rice. As part of the planning process, they left out some funding, so it wasn't it was a large amount of money, but it wasn't a big deal that needed to be. And then, like I said, there was also the time spent with the Minnehaha County intersection study. Also in the northeast part of Sioux Falls, or northeast, what would be the southeast part of Minnehaha County, again with Veterans Parkway matching up and Bonson matching up. So they went through several options that are available. They're all online with the State Transportation Department as well as the Urbanized Development Commission site, so you get a chance to see a couple of those. Also, there was an informational presentation done with I-29 and Exit 77, which is 41st Street, and rebuilding that intersection and on and off ramps on 29. And again, there were several options, and it's going to affect a couple of businesses that Pizza Hut, that is in that northeast, or would be the northeast corner with Carolyn Avenue intersection. And that was the time when I got a chance, a mountable intersection that they'll have, one you can drive over, but the median is going to be there. So it was interesting to look at different options. Again, there was a public input session that was also held on May 11th, or May 10th, I believe. And those were the primary things that we accomplished and covered.
Okay, thank you. Isn't that called the Diverging Diamond? I know all our planners are outside, but I think it's called Diverging Diamond intersection.
There is a diversion. Boy, am I going to start sounding like an engineering nerd, and that's not my intent. But the Diverging Diamond is one way, but also the circular areas. But looking how far back you put a median to affect traffic, so that you're not crossing 5 or 6 lanes of traffic that cause some intersection problems. And so when you go to the west from I-29 on 41st Street, how far back, whether they go all the way to Marion Road with maybe one access to the north or the south, where you can go from one area to the other. So there were multiple, I think there were 6 options presented, and they've narrowed it down to 2, and they're getting closer to probably making the right choice on those. So
Super. Thank you very much.
If I may ask,
yes,
was the Diverging Diamond one of those?
That was one of the options, and again, the Diverging Diamond and looking at the amount of land that's available when you get off or where you're around Interstate 29 there, that was one of the options, and it wasn't one of the better options. I think it was eliminated because, again, you'd have that ability as a when you're in your car to go across those 4 or 5 lanes. So there's some of that as they adjust how you get on and off. So as most things, that's why the engineering designers and planners earn their big bucks, because trying to think that whole process out of what people will do and to keep and make it the safest opportunity is the most important part of what they do.
So it was an option, but it has been ruled out at this point?
Let me go back and look
Okay.
and get you, I can get you that answer, because I'm trying to remember the two.
Mr. Belcock, can you answer that question? Yeah, well, that's why I
My
said
favorite
so.
engineer. So.
The preferred option is the diverging diamond. So the single point, I think, is the one that Councilor Starr, you were talking about, takes up some more land, was kind of set aside, although it's still an option. But the diverging diamond is the one that they're looking at as the preferred option right now.
Okay.
And that's the one where you have,
Is a video of that still available online?
I believe so, if you go to that website, the 41st Street website, you could
Yeah, I
you
would
could check it out
encourage the
there.
other counselors that aren't familiar with that to check that out, because currently, if you were westbound now, you would be switched over to the eastbound lanes,
Right.
and then it would route you, once you get past I-29, it would switch you back over to today's west side. But what it does is allows you to make a left turn unimpeded onto the interstate then. And so fewer conflicts, fewer accidents, injuries, and possibly fatalities. So it's a great option. I was sad to see it was ruled out, though, for the 26th and I-229 area. But I know that that was a little cost prohibited for that particular
Yeah, there was
location.
something to do with that that made it more difficult, but actually a diverging diamond is easier because there's not as much costs on reconstructing that bridge.
Correct.
So it works really well at 41st Street, where the single point doesn't, so.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sam, and thank you, Councilor Starr.
Yeah. Open discussion. Councilor Staley.
Well, it's hard to believe that it's been a year. I was sitting right here last year when we were sworn in our first meeting, and I just want to say to Councilor Rolfing, Councilor Chair Rolfing, I am so appreciative of these last few months. The way you've handled this meeting, I have never felt like you've shut me off on saying something. You've been so generous, considerate, and I just really appreciate that. So thank you for serving.
Thank you. Welcome. In case nobody knows it, 5:08, Councilor Urbanbach joined us, and I'm sorry, at 4:08, and but she has a 4-letter word in her vocabulary that I don't have, and that's called work. And so, thank you for taking the time from work to come down and do your civic duty. Did you want me to point you out?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really do appreciate that. I was working up until 5 minutes ago. So.
Super.
It is his last hurrah, so
Yeah.
he's going to
Yes.
get the last shot.
So the goal is to be as obnoxious as possible. Great, good to
You
know.
don't remember what you said about me when you were in this position, do you? No. Any other open discussion? Okay, Director Turback, our financial report for the month of April.
Good afternoon. Tracy Turback with the Finance Office with the monthly financial report for the month ended April 30th. Very typical presentation for you today, and then we'll move on to questions. I don't have anything nearly as exciting as diverging diamonds to talk about today, but money's always interesting, right? So looking at some of the economic indicators, unemployment continues to be very low here in the Sioux Falls metropolitan statistical area. March, or the latest figures that we have, indicates 2.7% unemployment here locally. That's up about 0.3% in the unemployment rate since the end of the year, and really exactly where we were a year ago, 2.7%. In comparison with the state rate, we're about 0.5% below the statewide unemployment rate, and almost 2 full percentage points below the national unemployment rate. You might be interested to know that in March, of 2017. We had about 2,500, almost 2,600 more people working in the MSA than we did a year ago. So that's certainly a healthy increase in the number of people actually working. Looking at building permits, we're 4 months into the year, of course. Year to date, the Building Services Department has issued permits valued at over $209 million. Very, very strong start again to the year. That's 82% of where we were a year ago. Of course, last year was just an incredible year for construction activity being permitted. And we know from recent announcements that there are some significant projects yet to come this year that will at least be partially permitted before the end of the year. So we expect at this point it will be another very strong year by the end of 2017. Turning to sales tax revenues, the 12-month growth rate that we look at and report on each month, ending April 30th, we saw a growth of 1.9% over the prior 12 months. A year ago, we were growing at about 4.5%, so that continues to slow. Last month, when we reported to you, it was the 12-month growth rate was at 2.5%. So we saw it drop off by a little over 0.5%. Again, the 2017 budget was based on 4% growth rate in 2016, and then another 4% growth in 2017. 2016, we actually ended the year with 3.4% growth in our sales tax. Entertainment tax revenues continue to really hold their own. You can see for the last 7 or 8 months or so, we've hovered right around that 4% growth rate. Ticked up slightly since a month ago, up to 3.9%. So to the extent that there's good news in any of this, I guess that's one place where there's maybe a little bit of good news to look at in terms of the entertainment tax dollars continuing to grow at a pretty decent pace. Looking briefly at the general fund, revenues and expenses year to date. Revenues we've had through April of $34.4 million. That's 22% of our budgeted revenues, just slightly ahead relative to where we were a year ago. Last year we were at $31.6 million, and that was about 21% of our budgeted revenue. So revenues overall in the general fund continuing to run ahead of last year. Of course, the one notable concern is the sluggish growth in our sales tax revenues that is continuing. Looking at general fund expenses year to date, we've expended $43.4 million. That's 27% of our 2017 general fund budget, and that is exactly where we were a year ago relative to our budget at 27%. So we continue to track well within our budget. You might recall last month we talked a little bit about the year-to-date number through March running quite a bit ahead of where we were at the end of March of 2016, and the fact that a lot of that had to do with that third payroll in March. So we had quite a wide gap comparing the two first quarter expenditure numbers for the general fund, and you can see now at the end of April that gap is closed down to a very, very small amount. Overall expenses are about 1% ahead of where we were last year. So we've that predictably was that gap closed with that rolling through that third payroll in March now into April. So with that, I will open it up to see what questions you folks have for me.
Questions for Director Turbach? Councilor Stark?
Thank you. Director Turbach, I guess I was on page 2 of the financial overview, and I was looking under projects that are recently bid versus, and then major projects under construction. And I was surprised I'm not seeing the new administration building under major projects under construction. But my question where I was headed was with the projects that are recently bid, I've noticed a couple of them that have come in are starting to be single bid for construction projects. I think I saw a $3 million street improvement project that was a single bidder. Are we starting to see that tighten up as the construction market heats up in the city?
There was one project recently that was a pretty sizable project where we did have just one bidder, and ultimately that that bid was rejected, and because it was higher than estimated. But that seems to be more of an anomaly than any sort of developing pattern. We continue to see pretty competitive bids on our construction bids to this point of the year.
Perfect, thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
Isn't, and I don't want to misspeak, but isn't the reason why the major projects under construction, the administration building isn't there, isn't that because it's bonded for, so it doesn't show, is that different? Am I reading that?
I think those that are listed there are those that are funded with our, largely with our second penny sales tax dollars. But yeah, certainly the administration building is a large project, and it is currently under construction.
I just thought there was a reason why it wasn't on there, though, because it's not included in some of that, because we make the payment versus these are all paid for in lump sum. We're not bonding for any of these projects on here.
Yep. And in your report every month, if you dig back in a little deeper into the report, there is a section that deals with the capital program, and it lists each individual project, what the current budget is, how much has been expended, how much is currently under contract, and in what we refer to as encumbered that maybe hasn't been paid out yet. So you can get a really good picture of kind of the status of each one of our projects. That section of the report goes on for several pages, so there are a lot of projects. And
can I have one more question, Mr. Chair? Just one.
Yeah.
Now you're going to make me forget because you're being funny.
Me?
Oh, goodness. I'll come back around. Oh, Rex's
fair
fault.
enough.
I did make you, I'm sorry. Councilor Staley, we'll give her a break.
Well, okay, I had some questions about the aquatic center. And I know we were talking about a $1.5 million, can I call it a subsidy? Or what would you call that? They were a shortfall?
The entire budget for the aquatics facility, the operational budget, is about $1.5 million. We anticipated in the budget about $1 million of revenue. So the subsidy or the general tax support would be approximately $500,000.
Okay, thank you for $500,000. So what I'm wondering, and I've had some citizens asking me this, is are we tracking this month by month to see what the revenues are versus the expenditures? Do we have that written down somewhere?
Certainly the financial activity at the Midco is tracked. Every month that goes by, we are learning more about how the facility operates. We haven't been through, for example, a summer season yet. We're told by other communities that, at least to my surprise, that summers are the busiest time for an indoor aquatics facility. I would think maybe that might be the slower time. So we have a lot to learn yet about what the summer season will be. That will have a significant impact on the overall financial performance, I think, by the end of the year. So yeah, we continue to learn. We've got new things happening really every month, and things that we're learning. We're just now, as you folks know, kind of in that first renewal of season passes. Some of those that bought the wintertime passes, and we now have an annual pass that's available for kind of a rolling 12-month period. That will certainly have some impact on the number of pass sales, or maybe the type of pass that is sold. So there's a lot happening, and we're learning a lot, as I say, every month about where we will end up. It's really hard to predict. We didn't have a lot to go on in terms of developing that, the revenue piece in particular, trying to make those budgetary estimates.
So, okay, two more things. So when will we know the whole package? What month will that be in? And then the second thing is, if it would happen to be that that is costing more than the $500,000 subsidy, and let's say it goes into $1 million, $2 million, how is that going to impact the park department budget?
Well, first I can assure you that it won't be $1 million or $2 million shortfall. I think we've learned enough already to say that with confidence. The best information that we have today would lead me to believe that we aren't going to end the year too far off the mark. Although, as I said, we've got a long ways to go. A lot of months to roll through yet. We still have the full summer season. I mean, there are a lot of things that will ultimately drive that. But I don't see anything at this point that's really indicating to me that the final year-end results are going to be drastically different than what we had budgeted for.
But so
I'm
what
feeling
you're,
pretty good about
if
that.
we're going to be able to say to the public, this is how we've come out with this pool, when will that be? We won't be able to tell them anything about how it's playing out until when? What month?
Well, once we have a full year of operation, I think that will tell us probably be the best indicator.
October? Is that like October?
My hope is that as we present budgets to you for 2018, we will give you the best picture we can in terms of what we know to that point. So I would expect when we start doing budget presentations and when the parks budget is presented, we'll provide that information to you at that time as best we can based on what we've learned to that point. I can't tell you what a full year looks like.
So that won't
until
be a full year, though. We're talking about like August then?
Yes.
So at that time, you're going to, I mean, it'd be interesting to know then if what the shortfall has been or where we're at. I mean, at some point along this journey, we would like to have some information as to where we're sitting.
No, that's perfectly understandable, and that's certainly our intention to provide that information. It's just when we've really been in operation for about 6 or 7 months now, and as I say, we're learning more every month. We're seeing how people utilize the facility. We're going to learn a lot, I think, over the next couple months once school is out everywhere, and see how that drives past sales or daily admissions. But I would hope, again, by the time we present budgets in August, that we'll have a pretty good indication of certainly how the summer is looking, and that will tell us a lot in terms of where we will perhaps end up by the end of December.
Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director Sherback. I appreciate when you come in, and I know that you think that we're all bored by this, but it's the foundation of what we do, right?
Just Councilor Kiley, I think, is the only one.
Yeah,
really
probably.
forward.
Two questions. One is basic, and I've asked it before, but I just think it bears repeating now and then, is that we're all looking at this massive document, and some of it's probably available at the table for the public that's in the room, which isn't a whole lot of folks right now. But this is also available where for the public that really wants to dig into the nerdy stuff that we're looking at today?
It does get posted on the finance page of the city's website. It is attached. It's sent to the clerks, and the clerks attach it to this informational meeting agenda, so you can find it on SIRE as well.
Okay, so lots of opportunities for folks to dig into this as well. Then my little more in-depth question is, I keep looking at this, and it's on the page number 5. It's not the 5th page, but it is page number 5 in that document we were just talking about. I'm looking at the Event Center Construction Fund. I keep expecting it to zero out, and maybe I just really don't understand how this all works. But at what point, I mean, there's still chunk of change in there, $2.4 million. What's going to happen to that? What's it for, and when does it ever zero out?
Yes, it will. We do have a couple of ongoing projects out there today that you folks have been involved in, briefed on, and have approved in terms of a kitchen facilities expansion. They're also adding a cooler and dry storage space on the main concourse level of the event center. In addition to a few other small improvements or relatively small improvements. We also have currently in design parking lot lighting, converting all of the parking lot lights to LED lighting. That was something that we had hoped to be able to do with the initial project. That was kind of put on the back burner for budgetary reasons for the most part, not knowing if we were going to have enough dollars to complete that project. Clearly, we know that now, or we've known that for some time. So that lighting project is working its way through the process as well to be designed and bid. All of those improvements are being paid out of the bond proceeds that are remaining in this fund. At some point, and I expect that will be not this year, but next year, I think once all those projects are finished and we know exactly where we are and we really don't have any other projects that really can be justified out there with those dollars, then that fund will be closed out. Those dollars will by bond indenture, bond ordinance requirements, go into the debt service fund to be used then for the next time a bond payment is required.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Counselor Erickson, is your memory returned?
It is. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's good. You know, it's not going to get any better.
I was just, yeah, I'll leave that one alone. My question is in regards to the number, we require a 25% reserve by resolution. And with the sales tax growing less than what we anticipated, at what point are we going to have to dip into our reserves? I mean, if it continues that, and I know it's early, we're only in 4 months, and a lot can change in the next few months. But if it stays at a constant 2 or 2.5%, will we need to dip into our reserves from that point? Because to be below 25, I mean, it's at 26 point something. So I'm just curious if there's a magic percentage number that we have to hit in order to not dip into our reserves.
No, that's a great question, I think, and we talked a little bit about that last month as well. When is it appropriate to utilize some of those reserves and allow our reserves to fall below that 25% level? And you know, that's really a policy philosophical question as to when it's appropriate. Our goal for this year is to end 2017 with that 25% still intact. So we want to be at or above that 25% level. And I mean, we've got a long ways to go, but unless trends really fall away from us in terms of our sales tax revenues, I'm confident we'll be able to do that. But there's no guarantee either if it becomes negative. And you know, in 2009 we saw sales tax revenues actually decline by almost 6%. So we're a long ways from that point, but that can happen in a hurry too. And it happened fairly quickly back then, and it could certainly happen again. But I don't see that. I don't see that happening this year personally. I just think the local economy is chugging along pretty darn good right now in terms of employment, construction activity, just the level of activity in the community is quite high. So I don't see that coming to a quick grinding halt anytime soon. We will prepare the 18 budget likewise with the goal of ending 2018 with a 25% reserve level. So that's certainly our goal going forward, is to maintain that. As long as we continue to grow, or even if we hit a flat spot in terms of our sales tax revenues, I think we have to be prepared to manage through that and do the best we can to maintain that 25% reserve level. Because as I just mentioned, and as we've seen in the past, things can get a lot tougher. And I think it's important to be very, very reserved in tapping our reserves. We want to be very careful about doing that and not do it prematurely. Nobody can really say kind of what's going to happen in the future, and I think we always have to try to protect ourselves as best we can against some unknown or unfortunate event in the future to be able to manage through that.
So to stay above the 25%, right now it's at 26.7, but to stay above 25%, do we need to be at 2% or higher? What's our growth that we have to be at an absolute floor to be able to hit that 25 without additional cuts? I know that you've already implemented things like, hey, everybody needs to be deciding, like, if we've got to cut back, find those projects, find those things that you don't have to do this year that can wait, to making sure that we don't have to dip. But if we just continue on as we are, you know, if we are at that 2%, would we be all right? Or is it just kind of a wait and see because so much is changing with potentially making some tough decisions within each other's own departments?
Yeah, certainly if sales tax revenues by the end of the year have grown 2%, I'm very confident that we'll hit that 25% level. In fact, we're prepared to manage expenses with zero growth and still end the year at 25%. So that's kind of the range within which we're managing our expenses, and we believe that if we don't fall into the negative territory, we've got the ability to manage expenses within that and stay at that 25% level.
Thank you.
Councilor Kiley.
Thank you. Tracy, I know that we've speculated regarding the reason for the reduction of our sales tax collections, you know, with the farm economy, internet sales. Do we have a hypothesis regarding our entertainment tax collections, or is there have we compared number of events in the city at this time this year compared to this time last year?
If you're asking why is the entertainment tax still growing at 4% when our other general sales taxes are growing at 2% or a little less, I guess I don't have any good answer for that other than I think what we've already talked about, the ag economy and online sales in particular. You don't buy a restaurant meal or a bottle of beer online typically. I suppose you can order some wine and that kind of thing online, but the types of things that are subject to entertainment tax, you have to physically be there generally to execute that transaction. So that would be impacted minimally from online sales, I would think. And certainly the event center is driving, I believe, a lot of what the growth that we've seen in the last couple of years with our entertainment tax. We saw it grow at one point it was growing at a rate of 10%. We didn't certainly expect that to continue, but they continue to be very busy out there and a whole lot of events and sell out a lot of events. So that's certainly a big driver of it.
Well, actually, the direction of my question was that it has been falling 2.2% a year ago and now 2.5% from last year. And if we think there's still some of the same ties, well, obviously it's not the internet sales tax issue, but
ordinarily,
our rule.
My expectation would be that the entertainment tax would fall off before the other does, and we're seeing exactly the opposite of that. So it's a little perplexing to try to sort that out and make sense of it.
Of course, we do have more opportunities now coming our way because of the event center that we didn't have before. So that could be a possible explanation, but it is an interesting conundrum. So,
Councilor Staley.
The 2017 budget was based on a 4.9% growth. Is that correct?
4%.
4%. So what percent are you going to be basing the 2018 budget on?
Yeah, we're still working through that. I think, well, certainly by the time you see the capital presentation from the mayor in late June, that decision will have been made, but at this point we haven't made a final decision. Certainly we're looking forward to at least 1 month's more data before we make a final determination of what kind of projection we're going to live with.
Do you kind of take an average of what's been happening and go from that?
Well, we certainly take into account kind of what the recent trends are that we're seeing in our sales tax revenues. Absolutely. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict, and we certainly try not to get in the game of predicting what's going to happen in the future. So we're pretty limited in terms of what we can draw on for resources to make that type of projection. That's one of the reasons we keep a good, healthy reserve. Is if we're wrong about it, we've got a cushion there to fall back on.
But isn't that the number that these department heads are using now to start formulating their budget? That they would say, well, this is the amount we think we're going to have based on 2% or whatever. Wouldn't they have to know kind of what you're speculating on?
Well, certainly we communicate with the departments, and it's not something that where there are hard and fast lines in the sand. It's a back and forth, and as things change, we adapt in terms of what expectations are within the departments for their budget, and all of that has to be all the dust has to be settled, within the next month, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Selberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Turback, for the presentation. I mean, obviously, the chart we keep looking at, I mean, if our sales tax revenues keep declining at the pace we've seen pretty steadily for the last 2 years at the pace they're on, I mean, we're going to be lucky to have any increase at all probably in about a year. But, I mean, the $1 million or many $1 million question is, what are indicators you're seeing that maybe that'll stabilize? I know we all get that question a bit, but you always seem to sound pretty optimistic.
Well, I think there are reasons to be optimistic. At the same time, I think we can't afford to be optimistic in projecting our budgets forward. I think we have to be prudent and conservative given the recent trends. And so that's certainly our intention going into the 18 budget process and developing the capital plan, is to be what we think is conservative at the time based on the best information that we have, and not predict some real significant turnaround in the growth rates. I just don't think that would be appropriate until we see it happening. I mean, we just can't afford to take that risk.
No particular indicators right now that are out there that are showing you that this should stabilize or maybe improve, or?
No, and we don't. I mean, we generally don't have good indicators. They're just not available to us.
Okay.
I mean, on a micro level, like we're talking about within one city, on the national level and even on the statewide level, sometimes economists can make those forecasts and those predictions, but those aren't the kind of things that I would base a budget on necessarily.
All right, thank you.
Councilor Kiley again.
I think we've had the discussion in past meetings, and I think it's worth restating again, too, when we go back to our 25% surplus, budget surplus that we like to maintain. By no means do we consider this a reason to go into our rainy day fund. The purpose of our 25% budget rainy day fund is more along the lines of a natural disaster similar to the ice storm a few years ago, or something else that may happen, some act of God sort of thing. So we have no intentions of moving into that surplus at the 25% surplus at this time, correct?
That's correct. But with that said, I mean, it's not hard to envision a circumstance where we would, something that maybe doesn't involve a natural disaster. I mean, if part of the reason we have that reserve is to help buffer against an economic downturn and drops in revenue. So sure. I think sure. That is an appropriate use of our reserves to an extent to help carry us through. Maybe, if it means going another year without having to execute some really drastic budget cuts or eliminating FTEs or that kind of thing, then I think that's a value decision you make at that time. Is it more important to spend down some of those reserves and preserve our level of service to the public, or do we reduce our level of service and save that for what may be a rainier day?
Sure. And you're right, it doesn't necessarily have to be a natural disaster. Another example would have been the failure of the sanitary sewer system back in 2010.
Yep.
Yeah.
I have a couple of comments. If the council would turn to the second page in the report, the one that has the colors on it and things. If you notice under revenue, year-to-date actual 16 and 17, we're about $3 million up in actual cash. Correct me if I'm wrong, Director.
Say again, which, just what we're looking at?
If you look at the year-to-date actuals, 31.5 million, 34.4 million, we're $3 million up over last year.
That's correct. Revenues
Sales,
are growing.
revenues are up still over 2016. We always have to remember that revenues are up. I loved what you said about one of the main things that we need to do is manage through this, and that you're prepared. You're getting prepared. We're even getting prepared for the same type of thing if it would happen for our department. We think it's important to do that. But I think what speaks volumes is the entertainment tax. That says that there is disposable income out there. Jobs are out there. There's a lot of things happening that are very, very positive for the economy of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And we need to concentrate and look at that while, like you said, be prepared and manage through any problems that may have or that may be. This morning I heard on the news, on radio, that Representative Mickelson is concerned, obviously, as we all are, about online sales tax not being recovered, and that they projected that to be over $50 million now in a pretty accurate accounting. He came up with he said, we've got to do something about it. Maybe it's a $5 per package charge that comes into the state of South Dakota. But somehow this state has got to figure out a way to put these people on a level playing field with the the retailers in this state, so that we don't see them go down and we end up doing our whole business online, which I don't think the economy is going to really get to very, very quickly, or would be good for the economy. We can't do much about the ag situation. That's handled by people a lot higher up than we are, but we sure can do something about that sales tax thing, and I like that idea, that kind of out-of-the-box thinking, and I hope that the legislature, well, even if they have to call a special session, if they can come up with a way of doing this, it would mean a lot, because that entertainment tax just speaks volumes to me, that we're still at almost 3% growth in that when other things are down. So, thank you very much again.
One last comment, if I could. And Tracy, the big challenge is, tax revenues were 1.9% above what they were at this point last year. However, our population has increased nearly 5,000, which is greater than 2%, 2.345, somewhere in that. So not all of that increase in population requires additional infrastructure, but much of it does. So when our growth exceeds our tax revenue, we're actually a little bit behind in the game right now. And that's the true challenge for a growing community. So I do commend you for identifying this well over a year ago, and for staying on top of this and making the adjustments that are needed so that we can maintain a balanced budget. So good job. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I think you make an excellent point, Counselor, that, it does create, it would be, if our population was stagnant and we weren't having, or being in a position to where we felt like we needed to grow services and expand services to, that would be difficult enough with very slow sales tax revenues, just trying to keep up with inflation and so forth. But with a growing population, the community is geographically expanding. We are building new neighborhoods and that kind of thing, and that does put a squeeze on the city from the other side as well, in terms of what it costs to really provide those services, whether it's police and fire or street maintenance, snow removal. All of those things eventually will cost the city money.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to your report next month. Hopefully, everything is in a little different shape.
Well, we'll hope so.
We'll see. Okay. Seeing that we have no other business to transpire, I will adjourn this meeting.